to, I think this is our sixth episode of the Future of Learning series by Game Changer. And it is so great to be here. We're doing actually two this week, so I feel super lucky. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, this series is all about the future of learning. We're talking to next gen entrepreneurs, experts, teachers, investors, pioneers who are all living and breathing what the future of learning is about. And we've had incredible guests on our series so far that you can watch on our website. We've heard from Shane Parrish, we've heard from Matt Window, who runs Lambda School. We've heard from Jerry Colonna, who runs Reboot, David Perrell, who runs a live writing school, and so many more are about to come as well to really get their take on what's next. And we're doing the series in partnership with Mastermind, which is actually a new live learning platform that we're incubating at Game Changer. And would love for you to check it out. You can get on the wait list at mastermind.co, and you can follow us at Live Mastermind on Twitter. And it is such an honor, privilege, and pleasure to introduce our next guest, or our guest today. I have known this guest for a few years, and I feel like he's a kindred spirit in so many ways. We both have a huge passion and love of learning. Our next guest is Navid Nathoo. He is the founder of something called the Knowledge Society, TKS, that I think is just one of the most wonderful, positive organizations in the world today. And he's going to tell you all about it shortly. Navid is a successful tech entrepreneur. He sold his last company to Box in 2015, and he decided he is going to singularly focus on training kids to impact billions. Welcome, Navid. It is so great to have you today.
Thanks, Candice.
How you doing?
Doing good. It looks kind of sunny here in Toronto today, so happy about that.
Totally. Me too. I'm just, it's amazing how much of a difference that makes for me. And you've got these beautiful windows behind you. So I'm sure it's very, very bright where you are. So Navid, when I put this series together, you were one of the first people who I thought of that needed to be on the series. And I think the reason is I still remember sitting down with you as an angel investor, you pitching me on what you wanted to do about 3.5 years ago. So for all of those people who don't know what TKS does, why don't we just start by explaining what this Olympic training is for innovators and CEOs? Tell us, what the heck are you doing to train kids?
Yeah, I think it kind of all stems from this concept of, are we maximizing human potential, and what are the mechanisms we're using to do that, right? So, I fundamentally believe that most people are probably operating at 30 to 40% of their full potential, if not lower. And I think that we have to be intentional about maximizing people's potential. And if we think about it as the world's most valuable resource, we're kind of using like shovels to dig for oil. It doesn't really make any sense. We need to innovate on the tools that we're using to maximize the world's most important resource, which is this potential. And so that's kind of how I think about it. And if you can leverage new tools, emerging technologies, all these things to maximize people's potential, well, the result of that is decrease suffering in the world. The result of that is building, next generation technologies and sciences to pioneer human civilization and societies to do things like colonizing Mars, or even things like curing cancer. And it all starts at people. And so what TKS is, or the Knowledge Society, is it is a human accelerator. And the purpose of the human accelerator is to find driven, curious, ambitious young people, ages 10 to 17. So we have two programs, a 10 to 13-year-old program and a 13 to 17-year-old program. And what we do is we put them through this 10-month accelerator where they're learning about 4 key pillars: mindsets, knowledge, real-world skills, and networks/people. So these are kind of the 4 pillars that we focus on. And TKS is a once-a-week program. So it happens on the weekend. But during the week, the students are all connected with our internal platforms that we've built. Like you mentioned, I'm a tech guy. And so we actually built our own, like our whole platform for students to learn on it, connect on it, to build things using it, all of those pieces. And we've also gamified a lot of parts of it, because I do think that gamification and education go hand in hand. Community and education go hand in hand. And so we've really tied in all these pieces together. So right now, this year, we're at 800 active students in 7 cities. And we also launched a global virtual program this year because of COVID. And we have students from the Ukraine, Indonesia, Singapore, India, Mexico, places in multiple parts of Africa. It's insane. It's insane, Candice. And the types of kids that
amazing
in the program from these other countries blow my mind. Like being in, the Western world in North America, we're so, sometimes it's easy to get closed-minded that we just look at the people around us, but we forget that there are literally billions of people in the world, and any of these people could be the next Elon Musk, Jennifer Doudna, whoever it is, right? And so how do you unlock their potential to do meaningful things?
One word, wow. And wow, for so many reasons. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you sat with, just a little pitch deck yourself, right, of this grand vision that you had. I think that was less than 3 years ago. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, we started TCAS in 2016, and I think we met probably late 2016 or early 2017, that type of.
Yeah. Amazing. And so there's so much to unpack in just what you said. Let's actually just start, right, by this really powerful comment that you made, which is we're not using full potential, right? We're using like a sliver, basically, of what's actually possible. And you made a comment in an article you wrote around this idea of blueprints and school being blueprints. And I think it's really interesting, especially for our audience. Hopefully some people are a part of TKS, and I'll talk about my affiliation with what you're doing. I have a son, I have somebody who works for me who's from TKS, I'm an advisor, but most people are in traditional education and the traditional system. And so I wonder if you can sort of highlight what you see as some of the issues with this traditional system around being a blueprint for realizing human potential. Why are we in this situation?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, first, what we all have to align on is what is the purpose of school? And I say what is the purpose of school, but we also have to think about what was the purpose of school, because I think it has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what school really is, it does build the foundations for people for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
You think about the amount of time that students are spending in school, thinking about school, doing school work. It is the majority of their time today, right? And so the amount of time now you're spending with your parents, the amount of time you're spending with your community outside of school, whether it's religious community, cultural communities, is going down over time. And that's a direct result of the importance of going to post-secondary education and the requirements to get in. So because the grades
Mm-hmm.
to get in are much higher, the amount of time and effort you spend on school is much larger now. And so when you think about all the other pieces that were filled in the past by parents, by communities, by extracurricular activities, the impact of that area is going down because of the amount of time and requirements you need for school. But school only teaches you a certain part of what you need to be, I don't really want to use the word successful in life, but to just do life, I guess, or to integrate with society. That's what I'll say. School will give you kind of the building blocks you need to integrate at the basic level with society. And I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if it's a good thing that young people are spending the majority of their time just to build the building blocks for the basics of integrating with society. And also, since I don't want to be too negative on school here, because I'm not that negative about it. It's more of like the mechanisms that we use it on. The concept that school right now is a filtering system. And I would kind of argue it's less of an education system than it is a filtering system, especially
That's not.
the older you get throughout school.
Mhm. So a lot you said really resonates. I mean, I think the first thing you said is understand why school existed in the first place, right? And that's shifted today versus what it was, 100 years ago. And we've spent a lot of time for this audience unpacking just the difference between the industrial system and sort of this new attention and knowledge, society that we're entering. But you just said something really interesting, which is about filtering and this idea of, you know, what what is the role of filtering and schools as filters? And maybe you can kind of just explain a bit more what you think it should be and what it is today.
Yeah, so it's a critical part of society. When you're dealing with mass systems, you need to figure out if there's a limited number of jobs, for example, at I don't know, big bank X or big tech company Y, and you want to hire the best people. Well, what kind of filters do you need? Or when you're a university and you have, a specific number of students that can attend, you need to figure out which students should attend. And so you need to create these filtering systems. Now, filtering systems in and of itself aren't necessarily bad things, but if they're used the wrong way, it can encourage things that might not be in the best interest for the individual that's trying to maximize for the filter. So, particularly I deal with mostly high school students. And so when you think about the filtering system for them, it is the university college filters, right? Mm-hmm. So typically what most people think the college and university filters are is grades and weighing heavily on grades. And so if that is the case, if universities are using, school grades as the top kind of filter for if they should come to the school or not, then what's going to happen as a byproduct? Well, what you're going to try to maximize in your years prior to university is that filter of grades. And so you're going to say, okay, I got to figure out how to get the highest grades so I can get into the best schools. And so now my time is going to be spent on doing that. Well, what is required to get the highest grades? Now we're working backwards, right? We're working backwards from the goal to the filter mechanism to accomplish that goal to now how you spend your time. And so how do you spend your time to maximize your grades? Well, you have to be really good at test taking, right? Because that's how you get grades. For the majority of classes and the majority of subjects, it's really about writing these tests, whether they're standardized tests, whether they're weekly school tests, whatever it is. And of course, there are other ways to evaluate like projects, but at least what I'm seeing is we're still heavily geared towards tests. And now you start thinking about different areas in tests, because what do tests really maximize for? One big thing is memorization, depending on what topic and subject you're working on. So now a lot of students are getting really good and spending a lot of time memorizing information. And now we got to ask ourselves two questions. The first one is, how important is memorization? And the second one is, how important is the information that they're memorizing? And what's the opportunity cost of that? So when we think about memorization, I think it's pretty clear to all of us that it's one of the least important.
Hey, Siri.
Yeah, it is one of the least important skills to have today. My little cousin, I was teaching him about countries. He only knows Canada. That's it. That's the only country he knows. And so I taught him, how do you use Google to learn about other countries? Because instead of me telling him what the other countries are and making him memorize it, which is what we did when we were younger and what every other generation did. Today, you don't need to do that, because you could just ask Siri, you can ask Google.
So let's go a little bit deeper on this filtering, because it's very clear to me that the world is getting a lot more competitive for very small, signaling brands, right? So we're talking about the institutions that still hold signal, and it's actually a question for me if they'll continue to hold that much signal in the future. But the amount of people that can get an MIT, Harvard, Stanford access is smaller, and there's more people who want it. You talk about memorization. Do you feel like their filtering systems are changing, and is that what you are helping coach or train TKS kids on? Or do you have a different mission, which is don't care about those filtering systems and focus on something else? I'm curious how you see your role at TKS.
It's more option C. And option C is really preparing young people to make an impact in the world. And I do think university and post-secondary play an important role in that, but not necessarily for what parents and the students might think. So traditionally, university has been the place where you get knowledge, right? Where you get taught things. If you wanted to be the best lawyer 40 years ago, you would want to go to Harvard Law, and your probability of being the best lawyer would be really high. Whereas today, if you wanted to be the best lawyer, if you actually built your own curriculum with like a mentor and you leveraged edX, you leveraged YouTube, you leveraged, LinkedIn, a bunch of other sources, your probability of being a great lawyer is now far higher because you're able to bring in information from multiple sources. Now, what is actually changed is the value of people has become increasingly important. And so instead of maximizing for the education itself, which you can still get a great quality education, whether you're at MIT or whether you're at another school that maybe not an Ivy League, but still has great teachers and curriculums, but you can't get the people. And so what I think university and that kind of institution is really valuable for is the people aspect as well as the self-growth aspect. When you actually have to move out of your house and move into another institution, you grow a lot. You have to do things for yourself all of a sudden. You can basically put a reset on your personality and become a different person and see what happens. So until we have another institution that helps people build their network and gain more independence, I mean, we're talking for young people right now, then it's going to be really difficult to replace universities. And the only reason to replace them, by the way, I think is cost. If costs were going down, that would be great, but costs are going up, and that's a problem. Now, when you look at post-university, you're starting to come up with a lot of really cool institutions that are trying to mimic kind of the Harvard Business School, but the valuable part of that, which is the network. So I'm going to give a shout out to one of those organizations, which is On Deck. Are you familiar with On Deck?
So yeah, feel free to share though.
Great. Yeah, I mean, they basically just have a theme and you can apply to that theme. So if you want to be a future founder, you can go to their founders cohort and you can just meet a ton of smart people who also want to start companies. Now, all of a sudden you're building your network like crazy, but it's really on your own terms and you get lectures and you get part of this community. But from what I understand, the core focus and value is the people. And it is a complete fraction of the cost. I think maybe 1% of the cost of going to Harvard Business School, but getting a similar value from it. I mean, depending on how you look at it.
I think you're highlighting a few really important points. One is just this role of community in learning, right? And the role of networks in terms of who we become as individuals. There was a saying that really hit me very early in my career, which is you are the sum product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, or, access and exposure are leading indicators for who you will become. And, I think that's super important, not just in post-secondary education. And I would argue with you that there's a lot of reinvention around ways that people are finding those communities, as you say, the OnDecks, the YComs, the what you're doing, right? At TKS, a huge part of it is the community that is being built. But I agree with you that signaling is still, it's hard to change institutions and the signaling value that they hold. I'm very interested in you sharing a little bit more with our audience around what you've learned about the best way young people learn. So, you've iterated, I'm sure, many times, like all successful software entrepreneurs do, on cohort-based community, cohort-based, project-based learning experiences. What are some of the big insights you have around the best ways people learn?
Yeah. So I'll list off a bunch and feel free to direct the conversation as I kind of go through this. So the first one is people are essential to learning, which is extremely important, because when you think about school, it's not really people based. It's more like topic based, teacher based, but it's not friend based. It's, it's a little bit different. So in TKS, what we did is we focused heavily on community, focused heavily on building relationships, networking, and within that, creating a culture. So we are very intentional about the culture that we set in TKS. We have values. We do a culture doc with the kids on their first session to establish, like, how do we want to act with each other? What do we value? For example, authenticity, feedback. We value growth over ego. A lot of these different pieces, we're very intentional about at the beginning. We talk about mindsets like anti-fragility. This idea that if people are, trying to help you get better, you can't think about it as a hit to your ego or as a hit to your insecurities. If you're anti-fragile, the more you fail, the more you fall, the stronger you're going to get. And really getting them to understand this mindset of being growth oriented and having that growth mindset over being worried about what other people think about you and being focused on judgment. So a lot of those pieces are important, and that falls under community. The other piece in community, by the way, is understanding how tribes and networks work. So there's a lot of research that actually shows us things, and we use that here in TKS. So the reason why we have cohorts of about 40 kids in each cohort is because that is the optimal number for a tribe. So back in the day, and even now, how we've evolved is, 40 people is a great number for a tribe. But then when you have like a community, that's really what our city is. And that's about 100 to 150 people. And so that's like the community. So you have like your tribe, which is your cohort. Then you have your community, which is made up of a few tribes. And then you have your society. And that society is the inclusion of a bunch of different communities that all have the shared values, that have a shared mission, mindsets, those types of things. And so that's how we really are intentional about the people aspect of TKS.
I love that. I've never heard it put that way, but I think it's so powerful. And all three, are very important because they're aligned around values. And I want to poke on that a bit because, I've heard different takes on the role of infusing values in the education system. And I think in a lot of traditional education systems, people have been very hesitant in a very polarized society to instill values. I'm curious your take on that. Like, do you believe that in traditional education systems, values should be imposed?
Yes. And I think it might be a little bit controversial, but here's the first thing. I think the first thing is—
I agree with you.
I think the first thing is that, and I give this advice to parents, I talk a lot to parents, is I think as families, just like how Google has their culture and mission, I really think that families should also do something similar. So imagine parents said, okay, what is the culture that we want to have here? What do we value as a family? Do we value openness? Do we value communication? Do we value kindness? Do we value growth and accomplishments? What are those things that we value as a family? And I think that's a core thing that we can actually take from best practices in religion, in business, in politics, and actually implement it at home. And so having like a values doc or a culture doc for your family, I think would be so valuable. And some families have implemented that, and they told me it's been amazing for them, which is great. Yeah. So that's one aspect. But then now you think about the larger institution, and now you think about schools, right? And the reason why I think it's important now to implement something like this in school is because traditionally you didn't really have to, because remember, school wasn't taking over your life. Whereas today, school is really taking over a lot of young people's life. And so we need to broaden what school is for, right? Going back to that first conversation. If school is just to learn specific information on math and science and English and history and whatever, then okay, that's the purpose. But I don't really think that is the purpose today. I think it is more about building the holistic person. It is about preparing people for the future, helping them develop things like self-awareness and understanding of themselves in the world. And I think values and mindsets are a key piece to that. the big piece that I also want to really add here is that if schools don't do it, who is doing it? And the answer is actually not the parents. It is TikTok. It is Instagram. It is TV shows, Netflix. Those are the places where a lot of kids are going to be getting their values from if we don't actually try to formalize it and be intentional about what types of values that we want to instill in members of our society.
I think it's so profound and important to have this discussion, especially in a world, right, where attention is, our scarcest resource, and we are, allowing our kids, and many of us, have a struggle, right? I'm a mom of an 8-year-old and 10-year-old, to just be consumers, and consumers of a set of content and information that, as we know, is not necessarily aligned with the values we have. I think the other important point is the lack of leadership in society today, and the lack of seeing role models as leaders, in a very broad sense of that word. And so, I think you made the comment, your community really matters, and there's a lot of challenges, I guess, as parents, trying to explain the polarized nature of the world today to young people. I want to, I know we don't have a ton of time, but I want to do two things. One is encourage people in about 15 minutes. You have a chance to ask Navid questions, and please put questions in the chat. We love hearing from audience members, so feel free to do that. But I want to bring up two things you just said, Navid, that are really interesting. Is parents. I mean, you, as you said, spend a lot of time with parents today. How do parents think about their children's, success as well as schools? And what advice do you have for parents today, when you're thinking about helping parents, coaching parents on how they should be around success in school?
I think it's a really important topic, and the last few months I've been focusing a lot on parents. Probably talked to a few, like over 100 easily, on how they think about education and their child's future. And remember, these are parents of like driven kids, and so what I've kind of understood from them is that all these parents want their kids to be happy. That's the no-brainer. Like, we want our kids to be happy. We want them to live a good life. But as soon as grade 10, grade 11 comes around the corner, the focus is really on university. And it's, for most parents, it is on, I want to make sure my kids get into a good school, because good school is directly correlated with good life, which, I mean, we could, that's I think another conversation, but that's kind of how it's seen. And in university, again, is important, but where parents kind of feel right now, and what I do kind of align with, is that we don't really have choice. Parents know that the education system as it currently is could be better, right? There's a lot of good things in it, but there's a lot of places that we could improve on. And parents know that, but they don't feel like they have power to do anything about it. It's kind of like, oh, we just have to play this game and we just have to accept it because it is the way it is. And I think that's actually one of the fundamental reasons why the education system hasn't been evolving and changing as much as it could be, because there's no strong pressure from the bottom. And there's also no pressure from the top either, which is university, if we think about schools, high schools, and if we're thinking about universities, the job market. So there's no strong pressure from the top, and there's also no strong pressure from the bottom. And so it's really hard to change when there's no pressure. And so as parents, I know you guys want to maximize your child's grades to make sure they get into good schools, but I think the big thing here is remembering that, yes, it is like a core goal for you that you want your kids to get into good schools, but make sure that they don't feel that that is the only goal. Because what happens at this age is they start prioritizing grades, and that mindset stays with them for the rest of their life, to play these societal games, whether it's grades, whether it's money, whether it's material assets like cars, but it's always trying to, beat someone else. And I think reminding them that, who you are as a person and your happiness and your character is the most important piece of things. And going to university is a goal that we want to get to so that you can be exposed to great people, great communities, great opportunities, but making sure that their life is not revolved around that one goal. And if it is revolved around that one goal, what ends up happening is they become extremely stressed out. They develop anxieties. They become very insecure because they constantly feel like they're competing with everyone else. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, that is the number one most important problem in the Western world today with driven kids. It is anxiety, it is stress, it is insecurities. And that is the most important problem that we're not talking about as a society that I see every single day. The majority of my time with kids is not spent on helping them with projects. It's spending on helping them with their insecurities and helping them overcome these things that are holding them back, which I really feel like shouldn't be an issue in the first place.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I think it is such an important issue right now where, a school like TKS is amazing. I mean, what these kids are achieving and are able to do is phenomenal. But what I'm super interested in hearing is that there's always unintended consequences of, different systems. And, how do you deal with that in TKS? When you're asking these kids to become the next Elon Musk or tech superheroes, how do you balance that with, what, it's actually just okay to go for a walk in the park today and just, you know, enjoy yourself and be a kid, hang out with your friends at the skateboard park. I'm really interested in that duality.
Yeah, so for us, it really isn't a duality. And the way we do it is by helping the kids think for themselves. And that's a
Mhm.
really core part of TKS. It is not about indoctrination. It is not about like forcing people to think a certain way and teaching them certain things so they do perform a certain outcome. As an organization, and for me, I do want to solve big problems in the world, and I want to attract people who also want to do that. But if people are doing things that they fundamentally don't want to do, they're going to be unhappy. And so in TKS, we actually have sessions. For example, one of them is called Life and Success. And that actually was our last session last week for the kids. And in that session, we asked them questions like, what does success mean to you? How would you define the components of success? How do you know you're happy and successful in the long term? We asked them about their fears. What are the things holding you back? What are the things stopping you from potentially reaching what your definition of success is? Because maybe you've adopted societal's definition of success, which is fame or money or credentials, right? Those are really the three categories it's usually broken down into: fame, money, credentials. And so when people can start thinking for themselves, what happens? They start building their own path. They start creating their own days and how they spend their time. And then that loops into what you're saying. They think about, well, I need thinking time. Maybe I should go for a walk. Maybe I should stop using Instagram 24/7 or TikTok and like hang out with a friend. Or maybe not during COVID, but like, do something else, go outside, play basketball, go dance, whatever it is. And so if they're aware of themselves, the more they're aware of where they want to be and the path they need to get there, the more they can start creating their own path. And that's what it's really about. And in TKS, we don't force the kids to like go change the world. It's really about, here's what we want to do. And if you also want to make a big impact, we will train you on how to live your best life while also making a meaningful impact on the world.
I really love that. I think firsthand I see that, and it's why I wanted to ask you the question. I wanted to pay a little tribute, I guess, to one of your students today because she works for Game Changer, and her name is Maggie Lee. And just to give you a sense of how incredible TKS students really are, I had a posting up right when COVID hit. Game Changer sessions became a thing unto itself, and Mastermind was, just being incubated. And we realized we needed an intern, and so we put out a posting. And it gives me, shivers actually, because I just wrote Maggie's. I'll show it to you right here. Her recommendation letter for MIT, and I just wanted to read you one quick comment that I made about Maggie, a TKS student. I said, to whom it may concern, it is with my greatest pleasure and honor that I write this recommendation. From the get-go, Maggie went above and beyond to stand out. She applied to the job posting, this is 100% true, with a full strategic Notion document describing how she would improve our marketing and social media. She left no detail to spare and showed not only her initiative, but her creativity and her diligence. Maggie is a rare breed. She has diverse interests in both design and science. She is very curious and adept at understanding exponential tech. I would describe her as being a technical creative, which is exactly what I believe you need to be successful in the future. She is going to be one of our country's leading innovators who understands the need to be fluent in technology to shape and innovate in the future. I could go on, but just to give you a sense of what these kids are really getting. And for me, it's not actually about Maggie's technical skills. It's about her mindset and about the way in which she approaches her work and failure and trying things that she may not actually know the first time we actually approach that specific problem. So Maggie, huge shout out to you, and huge shout out to you, Navid, for running a program that really allows people like that to thrive. I'm just doing a time check. So we got 7 minutes. Does that sound about right for what you hear on TKS students?
Yeah, I think for those people listening that aren't familiar with TKS, there's a lot of things we do to focus on this mindset of like taking initiative, being proactive. One of the things that we do during the program is called challenges. And so when I was in business school, you get cases and you have all the information in the cases, you do the analysis and you go to the class and you go through the case. But when I got into the real world, I realized all I have is the problem. I don't have the pages and pages of information to help me make the decision. I got to figure that out for myself. So what we do in TKS is twice in the program, we partner with companies. We've partnered with Walmart, Microsoft, Nestle, Sidewalk Labs, which is a Google company, tons of different organizations, Kidogo, which is a early childhood development organization in East Africa that's scaling to over 2,000 young kids under the age of 5 years old, providing them with quality education. And what we do is we tell these companies, what is a problem or challenge that you're working on right now? And why is it important to your organization? Then what we do is we give that problem that they're working on right now to these kids, and we train them on how to solve real world problems. This is probably one of the most impactful things that they do during TKS, because they're exposed to a real problem that a real company is facing, and they have to learn how to actually deal with it without having all the information. The information they have is the same information that the company has. And from that, they've actually done some amazing things with these companies. And the impact that they've been able to have at such a young age is insane. And they're learning about how to work in the real world. So like when Maggie comes to you, having thought out these things, it's because I hope she learned during TKS and these challenges that in the real world, you can't just put your name in. Do the work, put in the effort, do your research, figure things out, and then go and present, a recommendation on what you'd want.
And I absolutely. And it's also, one thing which is learning that it doesn't need to be perfect the first time, right? I think that's, both obviously my leadership and our team's leadership at Game Changer. We really value curiosity, iteration, and this idea that Maggie could go and explore something that she's not expert in quite yet. And one quick question that's super important to what we're doing, at Game Changer and Mastermind is the pandemic and the shift to virtual education and, specifically cohort-based virtual live education. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, are you still meeting in person? Does this transition well to virtual? What have you had to change? How do you see this playing out in the future? Is in person the only way that people are going to learn?
So we're not doing in-person stuff because of COVID, but we've always thought from first principles, and so because of that, we're always thinking about how do we make our virtual experiences, not classes, experiences, valuable, right? And there are different components. So I won't go through all of them because we could literally have an hour conversation just on this idea of virtual learning. But I'll give you a few. The first one is understanding asynchronous and synchronous learning. What are the differences between the two and how do you leverage them both? So for example, when we teach a skill, one of the skills that we teach, for example, is building decks, like slide decks, PowerPoint decks, or Google Slides or whatever. That's a skill. And so what we've done is we've built out something called playbooks. And in these playbooks, there's a video of me or someone else talking about the skill, showing them how to use it, why it's important, best practices. And then there's, some written best practices underneath that. And we send that to the kids during the week with an action item. So maybe like if it's a one pager and we're doing a project on AI, like we did this global AI hackathon, build a one pager on your project. And then they would reference the playbook and build that one pager. And so that's asynchronous learning where you don't need to be in real time to learn that skill. You can learn it by seeing a pre-recorded video, seeing instructions, and then actually implementing it. But then there are things that need to be synchronous. There are things you need to do real time. Like we could not have this conversation asynchronously, right? And so a lot of what happens in the sessions is things that fit one of two criteria or both. The first one is interactiveness with other people. So you're constantly with multiple other people, whether it's in breakout rooms, having discussions, whatever the case is. And the second one is evoking an emotional experience. Emotions and learning are directly tied to each other. The things you remember most are the things you have an emotional tie to. When you think about your childhood, the experiences you remember have a direct correlation to an emotion of that experience. And so in virtual learning, the reason why it is just less valuable than in person is because you're not able to bring in that emotion or that feeling as well. And so we really try to think about how do you create or evoke that emotional experience in real time so you can remember that experience or that conversation or the knowledge that you learned.
Super valuable. And are there any tips or tricks around virtual live experiences in creating emotion or connection that you're solving or seeing?
Yeah, the first one, vulnerability. So I mentioned community is really important, and virtually you can still make really strong relationships, but you got to create a culture and an environment for people to be vulnerable and to be authentic. And so our mindset last week was actually authenticity. It's this upcoming week is authenticity. And so how do you make sure, you're able to be authentic? Another thing with virtual learning, another tip is enabling choice. So one thing you can do on Zoom, this is very tactical, is you can actually create breakout rooms and let people choose what rooms to go into. And so what you can do is create different breakout rooms and have different discussions for each breakout room. And then let the kids or students or whoever decide what room they want to go into to have what discussion. So for example, we had an AI session. And in our AI session, we have different questions. So one question is on AI achieving consciousness. And what would that mean for how we treat AI and the laws surrounding AI versus humans? Another question we have is around jobs. How many jobs would AI be able to replace or maybe not replace? And what does that mean for your future? And so you create these different discussion rooms, but then let the students go into them. Now, one key piece before that is also you have to train people on how to have good discussions. So that's actually a skill that we do in TKS. We teach them about the Socratic method. We teach them how to ask good questions. And so you have to train them on those things before you actually do them. You can't just expect people to be successful the first time. So those are some tactical things that you could implement.
Amazing. And be sure, I will invite you back, Navid, to have that full hour session on this because I'm super passionate about that. But those were amazing tips. And really, really practical ways that people, whoever's listening, we have lots of people on this call today, can kind of bring that to their own learning. Because I think, the last thing I'll say is learning isn't just about young people. It's a lifelong learning journey. And, I hope what people are taking away is that while TKS is designed for young people, what a great time to train people in these skills. It's for everybody. To learn a lot of the concepts that you're working on. So, Navid, I could go on, I swear, Joe Rogan style, even though I don't listen to Joe Rogan, for hours talking to you, but I'm going to be respectful of people's time. It's 12:45, and we have some really great questions. And feel free, we most probably can have one or two more if people want to add. So the first question is from Shayed Hashim. They say, when I think of the future of work and learning, ultimately there is a difference of opinion between industry leaders and education institutions. There was a study done by Harvard that showed the following. Over 70% of deans think that they are preparing students. 80% of company executives think students coming into the workforce are not ready. How do you bridge this gap? This is a systems problem that will only be solved if government, education institutions, and industry come together.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
That was another key theme from talking to parents who are also employers, and also talking to a lot of friends and people in my network, that students aren't job ready after university and college, which is actually kind of crazy, because isn't that the point, to be job ready? And so that's a big gap. And I think a lot of it is understanding, what does it mean to be job ready? So for example, networking, that is a essential skill for everyone to have, but there is no networking course that you will ever do. I went to business school and I never went to a networking course in my life. You have to learn it yourself, which is kind of ridiculous. Another one is communication, written communication, verbal communication, how to structure a thought. For example, well, there are 3 ways I think about this. 1, 2, 3, you learn that on the job, for example, in consulting jobs. That's how you got to really structure it when you're doing your interviews through cases. And so I do think it's a problem. I completely agree with that. I think there are other institutions that are trying to solve that, that are doing more vocational training. So learning coding and then getting a coding job from that institution, or learning how to, I don't know, whatever, insert X and then getting recruited for that specific job. I do think there's a medium though. I do think there's a world for preparing you for your long-term, not just your first job, but then also with preparing yourself for the long-term, building those foundational skills that you need to be job ready, like communication, like networking. And I think we do need to think about, how do we incorporate that in schools and universities and in corporate environments, to be able to upskill our existing employees, and teach them those foundations that they can leverage to just do better at their work, which is critical, because everyone wants to do that. Everyone wants to be better at their job.
I think you're bringing up so many great points. And just a nod to one of our previous guests, David Perrell, who runs one of the best writing schools, virtually a live cohort-based writing school, that really trains people how to communicate, in a written form, but just the essence of communication. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of these programs because of this gap that doesn't exist. Yeah. So for anyone who wants to listen,
big shout out to David on our side, because we use his tweets in our program. Yeah. We talk about writing.
Awesome.
Like write in short sentences, things like that, because those are the types of people that are actually teaching about the future of these skills. Writing is not 20 years ago as it is today. Learning how to write quickly, learning how to be concise, simple language, that is the writing of the future, not complex verbiage, not overly descriptive sentences that people can't understand. And so, yeah, definitely people.
Absolutely.
David, even Shane that you had on the podcast, we use a lot of these people's, blogs and knowledge bases to train our students, because that's the knowledge and skills of the future, right?
I love that you're saying that, because there's this belief that these institutions are not going away, and then you actually start thinking about where you're getting your curriculum from, or who you're actually modeling, and it's quite interesting to notice that none of these are, it's not the Harvard degree on writing. It's actually the Shane Parrish mental models or the David Perrell.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, for people listening to this, like, who do you go to learn from? What kind of people do we, bring in content from? It is people like Shane Parrish from Barnum Street. It is people like David Perrell on writing, Naval on thinking, Tim Ferriss, Tony Robbins for general inspiration, motivation, how to think, how to take control of your life. There's also just a lot of great podcasts out there, a lot of great YouTube channels with this stuff. We look at philosophy like Thomas Hobbes, Socrates, Aristotle, Nietzsche, all of these types of people we incorporate because the knowledge is around us. It's about figuring out where is the best knowledge in the world and then learning from the best. The best are not in a textbook. The best people could be in this, random book that Plato wrote hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It could be in a YouTube channel that just came out today that we want to expose the people to, So it's really about being adaptive, about meritocracy on content, a content meritocracy.
I love it. It's killing me because we only have 8 minutes left. So I'm going to go rapid fire for our audience on the questions that I have for you. And Navid, you'll have to come back because there's so much more that we need to discuss. So the next question is a really great question from Lee J. She says, what are your thoughts on the approach corporations are taking on training and development? And we'll just do really quick answers if that's okay, so that we can get through as many as we can.
So big question. Lots of companies are focusing on it. I think they have the right mindset. Some of the most forward-thinking companies are probably like Google, who recently released a course on Udemy, I think. And so I think the more that companies are actually building training and then releasing it publicly on these places like Udemy, Coursera, Udacity, those types of MOOCs, I think that's really where companies can also find another avenue for recruitment, because those people will take those courses, be ready for the job, and then also apply to the job. So I think that's an interesting model.
Definitely. Our next question is from Jerome. Jerome actually works with us, and he says, how can schools implement interpersonal skills like communication, self-awareness, and leadership, especially in younger students?
I think
any advice on
Yeah, thinking about schools as multifunctional. Right now, the function of school is just information. If you think about schools as standing on pillars, it just stands on one pillar, which is information. That is why our courses are math, science, English, art. Those are mainly informational things, maybe not art, but the other ones. You have to think about as different pillars. Knowledge is one of those pillars, but then you have skills. There should be a class on a skill, like networking, like emotional intelligence. That should be a whole class that people go to.
Absolutely.
Mindsets should be a class, and then like networks and people should be a class. So remember, I mentioned those are our 4 pillars. So of course, like that's how we thought about it. And so incorporating it in that way in schools would make a lot of sense.
Julie has a great question, because it was something I wanted to cover, which is, when recruiting students, what characteristics do you look for to determine success suitability? When students are enrolled, how is progress and success determined? And one of the things I saw written was underachievers welcome, and maybe you can unpack that a little bit.
So yeah, definitely a big question, but I'll give you the quick version to it. What we look for is drive. Like, do they want more? Are they in pursuit of more? You cannot force someone to be driven or have a strong desire for something. That is up to them, and we can like help them once that's the case. But we're trying to find people that have that desire, have that drive, for the most part, or mainly our 13 to 17. For the younger ones, it's really like curiosity, which is important for both. So, and by the way, I define curiosity as the pursuit of information without reason. So if someone just wants like turn on a light bulb just to see what happens, to me, that's curious. So I want to find people who just want to learn stuff for no particular reason, just because they're interested, curious. We look for vibe, because we focus a lot on people. What's the vibe that you're going to bring into this? Will you get along with people? What's your character like? Will you be able to make friends and create a positive influence in the community? So we look at that. And then we also just look at intellectual horsepower. So, these kids are coming in, they're young. It's not like they have years of experience that we can judge that by, but from the application, we get a sense of, are they able to be pushed? If we did push them to build out AI algorithms or to learn about quantum computing, do they have the mental capacity to be able to say, yeah, I want to take on that challenge and I want to learn this and I want to build something in this area. So drive/ambition, curiosity, vibe, their character, and then their intellectual horsepower. And then what I would put just generally on top of that is their openness Like, how open are you to learn? How open are you to receive feedback? How open are you to basically be coachable? And then how we measure success really quickly is we measure you based on last week. So what we do and what all the directors do is we look at last week, what were you like? This week, what are you like? And then we set goals every week. So we have something called weekly trackers. And in those trackers, you set your goals for the next week and your intentions for the week and your priorities and all those pieces. And it's separated with health, fitness, things you want to learn, school, other pieces. And so we really want to make sure it's about constant growth. That's really how we measure success. Are you moving? It's not about failure or succeeding. Stagnancy is failure in TKS. That's how I think about failure. If you're not moving, you're failing. If you're failing, you're succeeding because you're learning from that. If you're succeeding, you're growing. Like, that's great. So stagnancy is failure and movement is success.
What a great way to end our conversation. I was once told something, which is a plant, right? If it's not growing, it's dying. And I think that's, exactly what you're talking about when it comes to human beings. If we aren't learning, if we're not moving, if we're not trying new things, inside, we are in some ways dying. So I cannot thank you enough, Navid. There's a bunch more questions that we're not going to get to because people have to run for 1 o'clock sharp. And I like to let people get ready for that next meeting that they have. But what I will do is post Navid's Twitter handle. So you feel free to ask these questions. Maybe we'll post some as well. But so many people just love the session. They want to hear about all the resources, websites, and people that we cited in this talk. We'll absolutely do that in the show notes. And we even have somebody who wants a program for adults and professionals from TKS, because I think, as people are very well aware, this is absolutely not taught, even in companies or elsewhere. So Navid, thank you so much. Keep doing the amazing work you're doing. I'm one of your biggest fans and will continue to be. And a huge thank you to our community. You guys are awesome. We had so many people on this call and it's on a Wednesday, so I'm blown away. Thank you for your support. Thank you for joining us again. And next Monday, we have an amazing educator and thought leader, Salim Ismail, who was the founding director of Singularity University and is now runs something called Exponential Organizations. And he is really reinventing the way companies learn, specifically about exponential technology. So what a great juxtaposition next to TKS to have exponential organizations. Just a huge thank you to everybody. Corey, who's my husband, who helps produce this. Thank you. And a huge thanks to a TKS student, Maggie Lee, for all she's done for us. You guys, you're awesome. Jerome and Samantha, thank you so much. And we just have incredible partners in this community who all really are passionate about where learning is heading. Toronto Life Insider, York University, General Assembly, you guys, the Knowledge Society, thank you for being a partner. Getting Smart, TechTO, Rotman, CIX, W North. Thank you, and we'll see you on Monday.